Namaste, this is Aditya and welcome to Shankar Martech channel. In this video, me and my friend Akash will show you how you can implement AEM workflows by taking the use case. This includes creating the custom workflow step also. If you are liking the videos which we are doing, please hit on that like button. That will really encourage us. Let's get started with the presentation.
Okay, so workflows in AEM can be used in multiple scenarios, but most commonly we will remember workflows to be used in two scenarios. Okay, whenever you want to automate certain tasks, like for example, if you want to compress the images, like whenever you upload an image onto a DAM, you will have to compress it, let's say. So this is a repeated task, right? So for that, you could use workflows. Or else whenever you are doing the collaboration, like for example, if there is any approval process which is there, or if you need any of the translation to happen with the third party systems, so those are the scenarios in which you will go for a workflow. Okay, so this is the high level understanding of workflow as to when to use them in AEM. Okay, so in this video, we have taken a common use case, which is a review and approval process. Okay, so basically what we have done is we have created one author group, author user group, and we have created a reviewer or approver user group. Okay, so two user groups we have created, and under user groups, each of these user groups, we have created one user. Like for example, in the author user group, we have created one author user, and in the approver or reviewer user group, we have created one approver user. Okay, so like this, we have created the users. Okay, so the process of creating these user groups and users, I have defined it in my course, AEM backend course. So the link for which I'll leave it out in the description box, you can check it out. So the process of creation of these user groups and users, we are not going to cover as part of this video. Okay, so the use case I'm trying to explain here is we already created the user groups and users. And what this author will do is he will add some elements on the page, like components on the page, and then he will submit this page for the approval. Okay, so this approver might be his boss or someone or a lead content author who will approve whether this person has done the authoring changes rightly or not. So this is the person who has to approve. So once this person has approved those changes, only then these changes, whatever this author has done, will be reflected to the end user on the publish instance. So unless this approver approves it, it will not get published. Okay, so that is when we will define the workflow process. Okay, so then author will author something on the page and he will submit the page for the approval, and then approver can see that the author has submitted that page for the approval in the notifications. Okay, so he will go to the notifications and then he will review the page, and he will have an option to either approve or reject that particular change request which author has submitted. Okay, once he approves, then then it will get published. Okay, so this is the use case which we have developed. And to show how to do the custom workflow process, we have added one custom step wherein we have created one page properties called approved by, like last approved by on that particular page. So whenever the approver approves that page, so that page property will get updated. So that is a custom workflow step in which we are going to show that also. Okay, so this is the use case. So now if we want to understand the workflows, so basically workflow will have two steps. Okay, first we need to create a workflow model. Okay, so workflow model is like a template wherein we define all the business processes. Like for example, whatever steps I have defined here, like once the author has author should be able to submit the request to the approver, right? and then approver should receive a notification, right? So all these steps will be defined as part of this models. Okay, so then the actual initiation of this workflow, so that once the author logs into the page, then for that particular page, the author should be able to initiate this workflow process, right? So that is the instance of the workflow. Okay, so first we create a model which is like a template. Okay, and then on that particular page or that particular asset, based on the use case, we should be able to run this particular instance of a model. Okay, so then what happens, that for that particular page, whatever we have defined as part of the model, these process steps will get executed. Okay, so these are the two steps which we have to keep whenever we are talking about the workflow model. Okay, so till now I have explained this workflow model theoretically. Now my friend Akash will show you how exactly we have done this. Okay, so Akash, you can share your screen and first show the custom workflow property which we have defined.
Okay, so currently, if I just go to the CRXD and to the page, let's say this weekend US and EN page, into the JCR content, we are not seeing the last published by property here. So that property is going to add by the our workflow service automatically whenever we are going to trigger the workflow, and once it is approved by the approver, only then we'll be able to see that last published by property, the custom property which we are going to add. So now to trigger the workflow, I'll log in. I have created one user with the name author1. So this user is a part of the content author group who is going to initiate the workflow. So I'll log in with this credential. Okay, so I'm opening this weekend sites EN page. I'll just make some change here. So I just added some a text component and some text here. Now, let's say author has to so author has to get approved this particular text or this page. So author has to start a workflow for this page. So we have something called start workflow here. Then I'm clicking on the start workflow, and here we need to select our workflow model. So we have created our one workflow model with the name Sankham page approval workflow. So I'm selecting this workflow, giving some name like giving some name like weekend EN page review and starting the workflow. Okay, so once it is done, now I'll be now I can go I can log in through the admin and see the request. So I logged in with this user Sankham WF approver, who is the content of workflow approver. This user is part of the workflow approver group. Once I log in, I can see this bail notification, and here in if I just click on this view all, so I got this notification that this workflow has been raised, and we can see the name weekend EN page review. So once I click on this workflow, we have something called here payload. So this payload is the payload which author has submitted for the review. If I click on this payload, I can see that this is a page and the changes the user has done on this page. Now, this workflow approver user clicks on this complete step. Author has so approver has two steps here. Either he can approve or reject the step, reject this workflow based on his review. So let's say he's clicking on the approve. and user can add comment here. So this step which you are seeing, approve and reject, these are part of the workflow model which we have created. Now,
So this dialog box also has to be configured, right, Akash? You have configured this dialog box, and this configured dialog box has been added in the model, which we'll see when we are discussing on the model, right?
yeah, it is part of the workflow model. These both steps, approve and reject,
Right.
and the then.
Even the
So,
dialog box also, we have configured it as part of the model.
yeah, so not exactly the dialog box, but it is part of the or split. So once we open the workflow model, we can see that. So it automatically comes based on this or step.
Oh, okay, got it.
So once I click on the OK, now we can see that there is no item left here. And just to check like if the workflow has been successfully completed or not, and also this has been content is published or not. Now what we will do is we'll just go to the CRX day, and we will see that if the that particular last published by property has been added. So I'll just refresh the JSR content node.
Yeah, I saw that below.
Yeah, so this is the property last published by has been added, and this is the user who has approved the workflow. So that username will come here. So this is it about the approval one. Also to see the if the workflow has been completed, we can just go to the workflow section and into the archive section. So this is the recent one, a workflow which we just completed with the comment, content reviewed and approved. We just see here and open history. We can see that how it has been started. So it has been initiated by the author one, and then later it has been taken care by the Sankham WF approver. This is the user who has approved the workflow, and actually is our workflow service who has approved and published our page.
Yeah, now you can
Okay.
show the model.
Yeah. So now to see the workflow model, I'll just go to the model section. And this is the first one, this Sankham page approval workflow. This is our workflow model which we have created. If I just edit this one. Okay. So if I just open the content tree as well, this is our first step, which is the participant step. So participant step is the first user or the user group who is going to participate as part of this workflow. Whenever author is going to initiate the workflow, the first request will go to this group, like this Sankham page approval, which we have given here. And the user group, we can see that we have added the administrator. So whenever the we are going to start the workflow, the request will go to the administrator for the review. Now the second thing what we need to do is we have to add
Akash, so the user which you created, that Shankam WF approver, he is part of the administrator group, right?
Yeah, correct. It is part of the administrator group. That's why.
And you have the notify user via email checkbox also. So if you check that, even email will go, provided your email server is configured and you have email associated with that user ID, right? Whoever is approving it, whoever is there as part of this user group, right? To everyone, that email also will go out. Right, and so email server configuration, we will have to do the SMTP email server configuration as part of the OSGA config. So that I will try to add it in my course. Okay, course as a text link. You can check that out, how to configure SMTP email ID. Yeah, proceed, Akash.
Okay. So now the once we added the participant step, second step is like So that approver group should have option to either approve or reject, right? So this was our requirement. So what we did is we added a or split. So on the left side, you can see that there are like different and split or split, and there are multiple other steps available. So we can, so in our case we needed or split because either the user can approve or can reject, so we used or split. And once we added the or split, now we have to add individual process step. So again I dragged it from this left side. If we just search here like the process step, so we can see that process step, right? So we just need to drag and drop it here. Likewise, I have added two process step, one for approve and one for reject. Now, as we have added two step, if I just open the dialog, I gave the name as approve, and this is the process. So this is the custom process step which we have written, because once the approver is approving, we want to publish the page and add that custom page property like last published by into the page properties. So that's the reason we have added this custom process step. And second, this checkbox you can see, right? So if our process is the last process in the workflow, then we don't need to check this one. Handler advance is to just it automatically pass the control to the next step. So in our case, our approve or reject, that's the only two things. So we don't need to check on this handler advance. I'm just saving it. Done. And second step, reject step, we don't need to perform actually any operation here. So I just kept the process step as a blank and just rename it as a rejects one. That's it. Once we added the steps, we have something called sync option here on the top right, you can see. So now, once we click on this sync button on the top right, this whatever the changes we have done in the workflow will get synced, and then it will be available for us to run the workflow on the particular payload.
Yeah, so what happens is whenever we are doing the changes in the workflow model, so initially all those changes will be there locally only. So once you click on that sync, what happens is it will create a memory object in the AEM. Okay, so for this workflow model, it will that this entire instance of this workflow model, it will keep AEM will keep in its memory. Okay, so now that memory it has already kept because this workflow has been already created, right? So now after that you are making some changes. So those changes are now locally you are making. So once you click on that sync, what happens is these changes which you made locally, it will get pushed on to that memory instance which it has kept also. And that memory variable, whatever AEM has created, into that it will get synced. So once that is synced, only then you can create the instance of the workflow. Then your changes will get reflected. Because whenever we are creating an instance of the workflow, it will take that memory object, not whatever is there on the local. Okay, so once you have done the changes on the local, it's important that you hit on that sync button for your changes to get reflected when you actually start the workflow instance. Yeah, now you can show the code, actual code, Akash, which you have written. Okay, so here Akash is showing the code, and if you see the line number 25, this code has been declared as an OSGI component. So we have used @ component. So it is a normal convention that whenever we are defining this workflow process, we do it as part of a OSGI component. It's because, like, for example, if you see line number 32, we have used @ reference and used the replicator service, right? So defining a code as an object, OSGI component will give us an ability to inject any of the OSGI services using @ reference. Okay, so that is one reason we use it. And the other reason is if you see line number 28, here the process label we have given as Shenkam update page property workflow process, right? And if you can open the AEM instance, that model again, Akash, and open that approve step. Yeah, in the process. So whatever name we have given there, so that name will come here. Okay, so then you will have an ability to select that name from here. Okay, so that is one reason we define it as a OSJ component. Okay, so whatever name we are giving as part of process label, the same name you will see in the workflow step also. Okay, and then you have and the component, the service equal to workflow process. This indicates to the OSJ service that whatever code we have written here is an implementation of the workflow process. So that we are saying it to the OSJ component so that it can internally maintain its own dependencies. Okay, and again for the Java code on the line number 30, we are saying it implements workflow process. So this is for the Java compiler. We are saying that we are implementing workflow process. But the same thing we need to inform the OSJ component or OSJ service also, because the OSJ framework will internally maintain its own dependencies, right? So it is the one way of saying that this code, whatever we are writing, is dependent on the workflow process. So now we have implemented this update page property workflow service as a workflow process. Okay, so then in the line number 32, we have just injected the replicator service. So replicator service is a OSJS service which will be active whenever the AEM instance has started. So whenever we say @reference, it will just get injected into the replicator service. Now, who is injecting this replicator? The OSJ framework is injecting it, because OSJ framework, when AEM starts, it will automatically start all the bundles, and as part of its bundles, we have the replicator service also got started. So then that replicator service, OSJ service, will inject into this line number 33. So then in the line number 36, we are using we are using execute, and this is a override function. Okay, so now this is part of the workflow process. Okay, so workflow process, we have implemented the workflow process, right? So this is an interface, and as part of the interface, we have an execute step, and we are just overriding that execute step. Okay, so this execute step will be triggered whenever the workflow model is triggered, and in that workflow model, whenever that process step is being executed, that is when this execute method will get triggered. Okay, and if you see the arguments of that thing, you have the workflow item, workflow session, and metadata map. Okay, so these are the three parameters which you have. So workflow item will give the instance of that workflow, whatever you are working on, right? For example, you are working on a particular payload, which is the page, right? So that page related information and that workflow instance related information will be part of this workflow item. And workflow session will maintain the session properties. Like for example, what is the user ID and password which you have used to access that particular workflow or run that particular workflow. So that session information will be passed as part of the workflow session. Okay, and then metadata map will contain any metadata. So if you can go back to that workflow model, Akash. So here, if you see the argument section, open that thing. So if you see the argument section, so here there are, you can pass the arguments. Like if you want to pass any arguments from the workflow to that process, here you can pass it as a name value pair. For example, you can give Akash name equal to value. So then this name value pair will go as part of that metadata map. Okay, and then you can use that metadata map variable, and you can just do the get of this name, and you will get the value of it. Okay, so like that you can pass the metadata to this code from the workflow if you want. So these are the three properties which we are sending here. On line number 38, what Akash has done is using the workflow session, he is adapting it to resource resolver. So again, resource resolver, as I told earlier in my videos also, is a database connection. We can assume it as a database connection. So if you want to access any resource from JCR, you will use that resource resolver. Okay, so workflow session already has the session information with which it tried to connect to that particular workflow. So using the same session, we should be able to get access to the JCR also, because the same login details can be used to access that resource resolver instance, which we can use it to access the resources, like for example, the page properties or anything like that. Okay, so there is a need for us to access the page properties, because as we told earlier, we are updating a page property which is last published by with the username who has actually approved this workflow process, right? So to update the page properties, we need to get the page resource, page object, right? So to get that page object, we are using the resource resolver. So that's why Akash has got that resource resolver. Okay, so then in the line number 39, we are getting the session also. Okay, so we'll see if you can see line number 53. So replicator service needs the session object to be passed. Okay, so that is why using the workflow session, he is getting the actual session of the AEM which has been established. So this is also an adapted to, we can adapt the workflow session to the actual AEM session. Okay, so what is this session and what is this adapt to? I have created the videos on my previous videos. You can refer to that. Okay, so then using the line number 41, we are getting the payload path. So as I told, workflow item will give the instance of this workflow. So using that instance of this workflow, because this workflow instance has been run on a particular page, right? So that page information will be there as part of the payload. So using that, is getting the payload path, which is nothing but a page path. Okay, and then if you see in the line number 45, so we are getting the payload path and we are going into the JCR content of it. So that is because we ultimately want to update the page properties, right? So that is why we are going into the JCR content. Okay, so now if we go to the line number 57, so that is where we are actually updating the page property. Okay, last published by page property, we are updating it. Okay, so and then what are we doing here is we are using history item. Okay, so what is this history item? If you go to line number 43, using this workflow session, we have got the workflow history. Okay, so now you can show Akash like where is that workflow history in CRX?
Okay.
Yeah, so if we go to where and then workflow and then models, not instances, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, instances. So here you will have all the workflow instances getting created. So if you can open that instance. So here we need to find the latest instance. Okay, so this is the workflow instance. So then you have the history of it. So now if you go back to the code, Akash, so here what we are saying in line number 45, line number 43. So using workflow instance, workflow session.get history, and inside that we did workflow item.get workflow, right? So this is the workflow instance name which we are passing to that get history function. So if you go back to the CRX Akash now, see this Shenkam page approval underscore 12 is the workflow instance name. Okay, so that name we have passed using workflow item, because we know the current workflow item which is passed as part of the workflow arguments, right? So using that item, we got the name and we are passing that to the history, which is part of the workflow session. And then we are getting the entire history. So the history is the node which you are seeing in that history. Yeah, that highlighted node, that entire array will be passed and you will get it into that line number 43. You can show that, Akash, line number 43. So that array will be populated with that information which you have seen in the CRXDE. So now coming to 57. Okay, so now here he is getting workflow item list dot get one. Okay, so now you can show, Akash, in the list whatever you are getting in the CRX, what is the one item. Okay, so this is the item. So now if you go back to the model, Akash, workflow model. Yeah, so here the first step is the income page approval step, right? That is the first step. And the second step which we have done is the approve, right? So now we are trying to get that approved. So this is the second step in the path, right? So in our history array also, this will be the second step, okay, in the CRX. So this will be the second step. So in the code, what we are trying to do, we are trying to get that second step. Okay, history item get of 1. So 0 is the first step and 1 is the second step. So we are trying to get that second step. Okay, now this optional of nullable, whatever we have done, it makes sure that there is a get of 1. Okay, in the history item, there is the element 1. Okay, whether that is there or not. So that is what we are checking with optional of nullable. Okay, so then if that get one step is there, then you are doing a map of it. So what is the map? I have explained it in our OOPS concepts in our course. Okay, but to recap here, map is an easy way of calling a method of a of an object. Okay, so now here in this map we are doing history item : and get user ID. So it means to say that I want to call get user ID method of that history item. So if you go to the history item in Google and find that object in the AEM, you will find a get user ID method in that history item. Okay, so what is that history item? It is the same thing whatever we are getting in line number 43. Okay, so in line number 43, we have got a list of history item, right? So whenever you are getting one element of it, of that list, so that will be of data type history item. So then you are saying in that history item, you execute the method get user ID. Okay, so then it will give you the user ID. Now, what is that user ID? You can go to the CRX now, Akash. So here on line number 5, you are saying the user, right? So this is the user ID which it will return. Okay, so this workflow history item is a out of the box object which is given by the AEM. Okay, so that out of the box object has one method called get user ID. So using that get user ID, if you execute that, AEM will return you automatically this line number 5 property. Okay, so this is the out of the box object which we are trying to leverage instead of going through the CRXDE and using the resource and accessing all these things. We are using the out of the box objects and executing the out of the box functions to do the same functionality basically. Okay, yeah, go back to the code, Akash. Okay, so now if you have this map function, if you have this get of 1, you will get this map will be executed, or else it will just return the null. Okay, and the ultimate data type of this after the execution of this entire thing will be a string, because the return type of the history item dot get user ID is a string, and return type of or else, which is the empty string, is also a string. So ultimately the return type of this whole thing, that option of nullable, that whole text will be a string, which will be set ultimately as part of this last published by. Okay, which is the page property which we are trying to set. Okay, and then in the try, using the resolver, he is committing the this thing. So this ultimately will get committed. Okay, so this commit will happen as part of the author instance, and that from author, this will get published and it will get replicated on all published instances. Okay, so this commit is on author instance. Okay, so now that is how we are ultimately through the code executing, getting the who has last approved it, right, who has approved this page. That information we are getting from line number 57. We are getting that information who has approved it, and we are setting it as part of the page property, and that is how it is ultimately getting reflected on the CRXDE also, which you can show, Akash, on the CRXDE where exactly now it is getting up the content node. So on that particular content page, say if you go to JCR, yeah, here last published by. So this has been updated by that workflow because the approver has approved that request, and then this code has been triggered, and then this code has got who has approved that information going through the history, and then it has ultimately updated this property, and that's how this property got updated. So this is the way you can create the model, and from that model you can call your custom workflow step. And what are the other out-of-the-box steps which are there in the workflow, and what for what purpose you can use them, that I have highlighted in my course as a text lesson. So you can just see that lesson, and you can just do some drag and drop, and you can try different use cases based on that. Okay, so that's it for today's video. Jai Hind.